Hey everyone, and welcome back to Deep Dive Cuttlefish. Um, we're diving into some pretty fascinating territory today. It seems like a lot of people are still kind of scratching their heads about the whole MAGA thing and,
Yeah.
why Trump still has so much support.
Yeah.
It's it's a puzzle for sure, and we want to kind of unpack that a little bit. So we're turning to a psychiatrist's perspective
Right.
for some deeper insights.
Yeah, we're taking a look at this YouTube video by Dr. Russell Razak.
Okay.
It's called Why Trump Supporters Really Believe in Him, a Psychiatrist's Insight.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty deep dive into the psychological factors that are at play here.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit.
Mm.
Dr. Razak starts off by talking about this feeling of insecurity
Right.
that's kind of pervasive in society these days,
Yeah.
and how that's driving a lot of these voting decisions.
Yeah.
And he breaks it down into two main types:
Mm-hmm.
economic insecurity and cultural insecurity.
Right.
And what's interesting is he links this economic anxiety to the rise of the gig economy, where stable jobs are harder to come by these days, and people are feeling more vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean that definitely resonates with me.
Yeah.
This idea that like the old model of like you go to college, you get a good job, you work there for 30 years and retire. That's just not the reality for a lot of people anymore.
Right. And he argues that this shift has left a lot of folks feeling vulnerable and looking for someone to blame.
Yeah, and that's where I think Trump's message really took hold. He was promising to bring back jobs, restore economic security, and it resonated with people, especially those swing voters in those key states who were feeling the pinch.
Right. They're the ones who are open to a change in direction.
Exactly. And it makes you think about how economic uncertainty can really make people more susceptible to these kinds of messaging.
Totally. Even if they might not fully align with their usual political beliefs.
Exactly. It's like it taps into this primal fear, of not being able to provide for yourself and your family.
Yeah.
It's a powerful motivator, and that's where this whole conversation gets even more complex. You know, Dr. Razak doesn't let anyone off the hook by saying, oh, these MAGA voters were all just born racist.
Oh, right.
He suggests that there's something more insidious going on, this gradual process of radicalization fueled by this constant drip of fear and anxiety.
Okay, hold on. Radicalization. That sounds pretty intense.
Right. Well, he argues that this radicalization was carefully cultivated by certain media outlets and online platforms.
Makes sense.
He specifically calls out places like Fox News and those echo chambers you find online.
Oh, yeah, those online echo chambers where you can get lost in a sea of misinformation and everybody just agrees with you, no matter how out there the claims might be.
Exactly. And Dr. Razak says that these platforms played a key role in stoking anxieties about things like immigration, transgender rights, and all those hot button issues. He believes that this constant exposure to biased information, it slowly erodes people's critical thinking skills, making them more susceptible to these extreme views. And that's what he's calling radicalization, this process where radical ideas become normalized.
So it's not necessarily like a sudden conversion to a new ideology.
No.
But more like a slow drip
Yeah.
of fear and misinformation that just gradually warps people's perceptions of the world.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even a little creepier. Dr. Razak draws this parallel between this modern-day manipulation and the tactics that were employed by the KGB during the Cold War.
Wait, KGB, are we talking about Cold War espionage now?
Yeah, you know it. Dr. Razak points out that the KGB was notorious for using something called ideological subversion, basically distorting reality, spreading propaganda to sow confusion and undermine trust in institutions.
Right.
And he sees a similar pattern at play today with a lot of these online disinformation campaigns that target elections.
Whoa, hold on a second. Isn't that a bit of a stretch comparing today's media landscape to Cold War espionage?
Well, think about it for a second. Remember how the KGB used to spread all those crazy rumors to try and destabilize the West?
Right, yeah.
Well, Dr. Razak is suggesting that we're seeing a similar playbook today, just updated for the digital age. It's all about manipulating perceptions and influencing public opinion, often through social media and these online platforms.
Okay, I gotta admit, that is a little unsettling. So we've got economic anxiety, cultural insecurity, and a sprinkle of Cold War-style information warfare.
Yeah.
This is starting to feel like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and that brings us to Dr. Razak's analysis of Trump as a toxin disguised as a cure. He argues that Trump very cleverly positioned himself as the solution to all of these deep-seated anxieties.
Yeah, his Make America Great Again slogan was undeniably catchy.
Oh, yeah.
He really tapped into that yearning for a simpler time, a time when people felt more secure, more in control.
Absolutely. It played on that nostalgia and offered a sense of hope in the face of all this uncertainty. And then by creating this outgroup, those who didn't subscribe to the whole MAGA ideology, he further strengthened the bonds within his own movement.
Right. It's that classic us versus them tactic.
Yeah.
Creating a sense of belonging, making people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves.
Exactly. And we see that in cults.
Oh, yeah.
Extremist groups all the time.
All the time.
It's a very powerful way to exploit people's fears and loyalties.
Right.
And Dr. Razak argues that Trump, whether consciously or not, tapped into those anxieties and presented himself as the antidote, the strong man who would restore order and make everything great again.
So are we saying that he intentionally manipulated people?
Well, Dr. Razak doesn't explicitly say that he kind of leaves it open to interpretation, but he does highlight the psychological mechanisms at play here and how those mechanisms were exploited to build this incredibly powerful movement.
Wow, this is getting pretty heavy. So if this radicalization is as deeply ingrained as Dr. Razak suggests,
Yeah.
is there any hope for bridging the divide? Where do we even go from here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And thankfully, Dr. Razak doesn't leave us hanging. He actually offers some potential solutions, but we'll dive into those in the next part.
All right, sounds good.
Stick around.
All right, so before we got too deep into things, we were talking about Dr. Razak's analysis of Trump as this toxin disguised as a cure and how he kind of played on people's anxieties.
Right.
But, is there any way back from that?
Well, Dr. Razak shares this pretty chilling observation from a KGB defector.
Okay.
And it's a bit of a gut punch, but it's important to hear, I think.
Okay.
This defector claimed that once a society gets to this point of demoralization, it's essentially complete and irreversible.
Oh, wow. That's pretty dark.
Yeah.
So is he saying there's no hope for these folks,
Right.
that they're just stuck in this MAGA mindset forever?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that Dr. Razak is entirely without hope.
Okay.
He acknowledges the deep concern about the lasting effects of this radicalization,
Uh-huh.
but he also believes that we're not powerless.
Okay, so there's a glimmer of light in all this darkness.
Yeah, there's a glimmer.
What does he suggest we can do about it?
He proposes a pretty radical solution.
Okay.
Deepening democracy through greater citizen participation.
Greater citizen participation. How would that even work? Wouldn't that just create more chaos?
Well, this is where things get really interesting.
Oh.
Dr. Razak suggests leveraging AI to gather opinions and facilitate consensus building among citizens.
Hold on. AI running our democracy. That sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Right.
Isn't that a little risky?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, think about it for a second. Our current system is based on this one vote every 4 years model, right?
Right. Yeah. We elect representatives and then hope for the best.
Exactly. But what if we could have a more continuous, dynamic dialogue with our elected officials?
Okay. I'm listening.
So imagine a system where AI analyzes millions of opinions, identifies common ground, and helps to forge consensus on these really complex issues.
So like a massive, constantly evolving online town hall meeting.
Exactly.
But one that's actually efficient and productive.
Right. Precisely.
That's a pretty wild idea.
Yeah.
I gotta say, it's kind of intriguing, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it could address that feeling of powerlessness that Dr. Razak talked about, right? Giving people a real voice,
Absolutely.
a sense of ownership over their government.
That's exactly what he's getting at.
Yeah.
If people feel like they have a genuine stake in shaping their future, they're less likely to be drawn to those who peddle fear and division.
I see. So instead of clinging to a strongman figure who promises these simple solutions,
Right.
they could actively participate in creating a more nuanced and effective path forward.
Exactly.
But let's be realistic here. Do you really think something like this could actually work? I mean, wouldn't it just become another battleground for misinformation and polarization?
That's a valid concern for sure. But remember, we're talking about using AI to facilitate productive dialogue here, not just amplify existing divisions.
Yep.
The key is to design the system in a way that encourages critical thinking, constructive debate, and a willingness to consider different viewpoints.
That's a tall order.
It is.
And how do we ensure that this AI is truly impartial,
Right.
not influenced by biases or hidden agendas?
That's crucial. The development and implementation of such a system would require rigorous ethical considerations and transparency. We'd need to ensure that the AI is designed to prioritize fairness, accuracy, and the public good.
So it's not just about the technology itself,
No.
but also about the values and principles that underpin its design and application.
Exactly. And we need to be aware of the potential pitfalls. AI is a powerful tool,
Yeah.
and like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. But if we approach it thoughtfully and with the right safeguards in place, I believe it has the potential to really transform our democracy for the better.
Okay, so Dr. Razak is proposing this radical shift towards a more AI-driven participatory democracy.
Yeah.
But even if we could pull that off, is it really enough to counteract this deep-seated insecurity and radicalization he's talking about?
Well, he believes that addressing the root causes of those anxieties is essential.
Okay.
He argues that we need to create a society where everyone feels a sense of belonging, purpose, and opportunity.
So it's not just about fixing the political system.
No.
It's about addressing the underlying social and economic conditions that make people vulnerable to these kinds of movements in the first place.
Exactly. And that's a complex challenge that requires a multifaceted approach.
For sure.
But I think Dr. Razak's analysis offers us a really valuable framework for understanding the problem and starting to think about potential solutions.
I agree. It's given us a lot to chew on, but I think it's time we zoom out a bit and recap what we've learned from Dr. Razak's perspective.
Okay, so we've been on quite the journey here with Dr. Razak's analysis.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. It really has. So let's take a moment just to kind of recap the key takeaways here.
Okay.
We started by looking at how economic insecurity and that shift towards a gig economy really played a role in creating this fertile ground for Trump's message.
Right, and then we explored how that economic anxiety feeds into a deeper sense of cultural and identity insecurity.
Right.
And Dr. Razak argues that these anxieties were then exploited and fueled by this really potent mix of right-wing media, online echo chambers, and even some tactics that are reminiscent of Cold War propaganda.
Yeah, it's kind of a sobering picture he paints.
Yeah.
It's like this perfect storm of vulnerability and manipulation. And it led to this disturbing trend of radicalization where extreme views become normalized and even celebrated.
Yeah, and it makes you think back to that chilling quote from the KGB defector.
Oh, yeah.
The one about how this demoralization could be irreversible.
Right. That was a very bleak moment. But remember, Dr. Razak doesn't leave us completely without hope.
No, he doesn't.
He proposes this kind of radical idea of deepening democracy through greater citizen participation.
Right.
He even suggests using AI to help gather opinions and build consensus.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty mind-blowing concept.
Yeah. It's a huge idea.
It really is. It makes you wonder if we could actually create a more responsive and inclusive democracy.
Right.
Where everyone feels heard and empowered.
Yeah. I mean, that's the goal, right?
It is. But I also wonder, even if we could pull that off, is it enough to really address the underlying issues that Dr. Razak has identified?
Well, that's a great question. And I think Dr. Razak would probably say that it's part of the solution and not the whole picture.
Right.
He really emphasizes the need to address the root causes of these anxieties, to create a society where everyone feels a sense of belonging, purpose, and opportunity.
So it's not just about tweaking the political system.
Yeah.
It's about building a more just and equitable society where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Exactly. And that requires a multifaceted approach. It involves education, economic reforms, and social programs that address systemic inequalities.
It's a tall order.
Yeah.
But I think Dr. Razak's analysis gives us a good starting point.
Right.
It helps us understand the complex psychological and societal forces that are at play here.
Yeah.
And it challenges us to think creatively about solutions.
Absolutely. And, it also reminds us that we can't just dismiss those who hold different views as deplorables or simply write them off as hopelessly lost.
Right.
We need to engage in constructive dialogue, understand their concerns, and work together to build a more inclusive and just society.
Well said. So to wrap things up, I think the key takeaway here is that this whole MAGA phenomenon isn't just about politics. It's a symptom of these deeper anxieties and vulnerabilities within our society.
Yeah.
And we really need to address those root causes and empower citizens to feel like they have a genuine stake in shaping their future.
Absolutely. And, while the challenges are definitely complex, there's always hope. Dr. Razak's call for a more participatory democracy, potentially even leveraging AI, it offers us a glimpse of what a more inclusive and responsive system could look like.
It's a powerful image to leave us with. And if you're as intrigued by Dr. Razak's insights as we are, be sure to check out his YouTube channel and his upcoming book. We'll put the links in the description below.
Awesome. Thanks for diving deep with us today. Everyone, remember, even in the most murky depths, there's always something fascinating to discover, and sometimes even a glimmer of hope.
Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and keep those tentacles wiggling.